Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host,
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we are back at it again. We are here. We are essentially one day away from the beginning of a new NBA season. We got a lot of different things to talk about. So I guess first order of business, let's talk some extensions, right? So we got a few players around the league. Some of these young guys that are on rookie deals have now kind of started to get paid because I think you have about until opening night or so is the deadline, and we're kind of waiting for a lot of these guys. But we had a pair of extensions from the Blazers, right? Shaedon Sharpe and Toumani Camara, right? Shaedon Sharpe 4 years, $90 million. Camara 4 years, $82 million, right? So now those two guys are going to be locked in long term for this Portland Trailblazers team that a lot of people are excited about just because of how they played towards the end of last year, especially on the defensive end. They made the trade for Drew Holiday, as we already talked about, right? We did do a Blazers offseason review earlier in the summer, right? And then, of course, they got the other young guys like Hanson Young, of course, Scoot as well, year 3, although he's not going to begin the season because he's hurt with the hamstring injury. But what was your first thoughts about the extension? Because they seem to me like pretty good bargains, pretty good deals for two guys who are good players that have a lot of upside. And in the case of Camara, right, he's got a lot of two-way ability, right? Of course, because we know that he was one of the best defensive players in the league last season, in addition to being, an improving offensive player, right? You wouldn't call him a scorer, but, he can knock down open shots. He's a decent athlete. And it was a guy that the Phoenix Suns gave away.
Yeah, I mean, I like it. They're very crucial parts of their young core, right? You already talked about it. Camara being, such a great defender and having so much upside on that end of the floor. And then obviously Shaedon Sharpe, we know what he can do, offensively and what he provides. So I am kind of curious, how it goes in the long run. But I think these are pretty, fair deals, in my opinion. I don't really have a problem with anything.
Yeah, I mean, because again, like in terms of the Blazers, like those are guys that you're locking down long term, that you're gonna hopefully have for a while, as they go through this rebuild. So yeah, like you said, they're great deals, great bargains for good players that I think can get better. And like Shaedon Sharpe, right? Like he's a guy where good scorer, has kind of needed to improve the all around offensive game, as well as the defense, but he's got all the tools to be able to get better. And I think he will continue to improve, especially just like I said, considering the personnel that he's got around him now. Like I said, I wish Scoot was healthy going into the season just so we could kind of see what the full crop of this team would look like, right? So that's probably a team that, we were doing over unders where they're I can't remember whether or not we picked over or under. I have to go back and look. But it might be a little bit under now because of that injury.
Absolutely. But
yeah, we both picked over.
Yeah, but I feel good about that young team. Like they're just kind of continuing to build on what they already had from last year. So yeah, internal development is going to be their key, and there's nothing better than signing your young talent on borderline bargains.
Yeah, and I am curious what they're going to do in terms of who's going to play and what the lineups are going to be, because you have a couple of veterans where those are guys where they're making a lot of money, and you're probably not necessarily going to just sit them, right? Holiday will probably have to start now because of Scoot's injury, but you also have Jeremy Grant, right, who's been on the roster, who gets paid a lot of money, right, and still is paid a lot of money over the next few years, but he plays a position where you kind of have other guys that you might kind of want to prefer to play, right? Like you got Denny Avdia, right, who we hadn't talked about, but obviously they extended him, or the Wizards extended him a while back, and then he's on that contract for the Blazers after they traded him. And then you also have Camara, right? So you already have two guys that are wings, right, that should both probably start, but I don't know what they're gonna do with Jeremy Grant, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I know he said on media day he sees himself as a starter, but is he actually gonna start over those guys? Do they kind of go with a weird conventional lineup where maybe Holiday doesn't start, and then they just kind of start big, with like Avdia or Shaedon Sharpe kind of as the primary ball handler? I don't know, but I am curious to see what that looks like, because most of the other guys I think you can slot into place, especially because there's a couple where it's like by default, like Robert Williams is out, he's hurt,
Right.
so you don't have the option to play him anyway, so you kind of already can just slide into, all right, Klingon starting center, Hansen Young backup center. But what do you think?
Yeah, that's kind of the problem when you do have a plethora of talent and the veterans, right? It's like you do want to make space for the young guys, but at the same time, you do have guys that definitely need to play. But yeah, it is interesting because they do have a, I don't want to say crowded center room, but it's getting there, I think. And then the guards, they have a ton. Obviously, we know they got rid of Simons, but they still got a guard in return, in Drew Holiday. So
Yeah.
I am kind of curious what the be all end all of the starting lineup is, but I think those guys are going to have a very big role, I think, this year.
Yeah, and of course we'd be remiss to talk if we didn't talk about Kevin Durant,
Of
right?
course.
Also signing an extension for 2 years. Probably should have started with him,
Yeah.
but 2 years, 90 million, right? And this is a discount, right? Because the initial reporting was not that he was going to get it, but it was gonna, just because we know how the math works, right? It was up. It could have been up to 2 years, 120 million, right? But instead, it's 2 years, 90 million, right? So now we knew that this we knew he was gonna get extended. Just was about how much money was he gonna get, maybe potentially how many years. I know with the over 38 rule, I don't think you can really go but so far. So I don't, maybe just, I think you can't go more than 2 years anyways. But so now, at least for the time being, he's locked in for this team for the next few seasons. And it makes sense for both sides, right? Because in the case of the Rockets, right? Like, they're also eventually going to have to extend some of these other young players, right? Like over the summer, they extended Jabari Smith Jr., gave him, like what, like the basically 4 or 5 year max extension. The year before, they extended Alperen Şengün, so he's already going to be in the first year of his new deal.
Hmm.
And then obviously, eventually, they're going to have to pay Amen Thompson, right? So you already have like a bunch of guys that eventually are going to have to get locked in contract wise, and that's going to be an expensive roster, an expensive team. But they see themselves as a contender, and it's kind of hard to do that and not be an expensive roster aside from Oklahoma City, right? Because so many of their guys are drafted, but just in terms of their cap this season, right? So you're gonna have Durant at 54 million, right? This was the last, so this is the last year of his current contract. Then you got Sengun at 34, then Fred VanVleet at 25, right? And then after that, it's a mixture of different guys. Steven Adams at 14, Dorian Finney-Smith at 12, Jabari Smith Jr. in the last year of his rookie deal at 12. And then next season, right? Then Durant at 43, Sengun at 35. Van Vliet's got the team option, right, for 25. And then Jabari Smith Jr. will be in the first year of his new deal at 23. And then Amen Thompson probably will be extended, presumably, next offseason. So it's going to get expensive, but this is perfectly fine for both sides, right? Because I don't think Houston was going to give Durant the full 2 year max extension just because of the age, um, and how and the attrition at this point in his career. So it's kind of like obviously he took less money, and this helps give Houston more options to do whatever they need to do. But I don't think Houston was probably going to give him the full extension because we've kind of seen now with the way that some of these extensions work, where these teams aren't automatically just giving guys the big max extensions. And in some cases, they're just not paying him at all, right? Like with Miami, they didn't want to give Jimmy Butler the max extension, right? And then he gets traded to the Warriors, then they give him the extension, right? Reportedly for the Lakers, right? LeBron wasn't offered an extension at all, right? So now he's just in the last year of his deal. So it seems like that's probably where we're going to be. But, for Houston now, you've taken care of all your offseason business. So now, begins the regular season business.
Yeah. I mean, shout out to Katie and shout out to the Houston Rockets for getting this done because I do know that there were kind of discussions about this, and I think everybody knew it was coming. But like I said, shout out to them for getting it done. It makes Katie, have the most on court earnings of all time, so most career earnings in NBA history. So shout out to him for that. Shows the longevity and the kind of caliber player that he is. I think he's going to bring tons of championship experience and a much needed calming offensive presence to that team. And yeah, I mean going forward, I think it's going to be fine. Like you said, it's going to get expensive, but I think it'll be a solid, memorable final chapter for Katie. I think because I think I'm not saying that he's going to be retiring very very soon, but it is the end of his career, and I think this is a nice way to kind of go out.
Yeah, like, and ultimately, if you're Houston, like, there was an incentive for both sides to get this done, right? Like, you wouldn't trade for Durant basically as like a 1 year rental. Like, you're probably
Right.
trading for him to have him around. Now, of course, things can change, right? Of course, just let's say Giannis in the offseason is like, I want out and I want to go to X, Y, and Z. Okay, maybe stuff changes, but at least for now, like if you're Houston, you have the option. You have the optionality of we got Durant, we got him for this season, and at least two more seasons. Assuming that everything goes perfectly fine with the team going forward. And it, like I said, it will give them the option to be able to set their team up for more continued success, so that way they can pay the guys that they want to pay without having to, basically put themselves in a nightmarish situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after that, we are still kind of waiting for a few other rookie extensions, right? And some of these may just come down to the wire. We've gotten reports that have kind of, tried to suggest what could happen with some of these guys. So like Dyson Daniels for the Atlanta Hawks, right? He's not gotten an extension. He's looking, I guess, for the 5-year 150, right? It sounds like from Mark Stein that Atlanta is more so in the line of like 5 years 115 or so, right? This is kind of similar to some of the other guys that we heard about in the summer, right? Like say like a Josh Giddey, where it's like, yeah, we're not going to give you the full max, right? We're gonna try to see if we can maybe find a way in between. I don't know if it's gonna get done. If it does, it'll probably be like Giddy, where it'll be an extension, but it probably will be somewhere in the middle, right? As opposed to like, I don't think it's 5 years 150, and I don't think it'll be the smaller option either, right? So I don't know if I can just predict that it's going to get done. Like, it wouldn't shock me if it just didn't get done at all, and then you just go into restricted free agency.
Mhm.
It would be nice if you're the Hawks if you could get it done, because especially if you get one of the lesser expensive options, right? According to Bobby Marks, right? If they do 5 years 125, and that's what he would offer, right? It would still get Atlanta below the luxury tax and beneath both aprons, right?
Okay.
Obviously, then you'd have to figure out what you're going to do with Trey Young. But yeah, like I don't feel like I don't feel like that you really. I feel like you should probably get into a scenario where he is signed and extended, but just because of what he can do on both ends of the floor and young and still improving, I just don't know if I have confidence. But I guess I'll lean into something probably gets done, but I wouldn't expect it, like I said, at the 5-year 150.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. I am curious what the Hawks' thought process is on that. So, they've got some things to figure out, but I think this year should be very intriguing just based off of, the additions that they made and, the leaps that we're kind of expecting them to take.
Yeah. Then moving on, Christian Brown for the Denver Nuggets, right? There's also been talks about him, right? And what's potentially his extension coming up, right? There's been talks about somewhere along the lines of maybe like 5 years, 115, 125, because we know obviously that he's another guy that's a pretty valuable player, especially for the Denver Nuggets, right? We know that they let KCP walk because they felt confident that Christian Brown could come in and could basically, I guess, kind of become sort of the replacement. And he actually did play very well, right, last season, right? He had a career year, obviously from the 3-point line, right? He's kind of an up and down offensive guy, but just in terms of what he can do on both ends of the floor, right? As a guy who can get out and run, as a guy, who can be an athlete and be a athletic, physical, on-ball defender. I would think that they would probably extend him, right? I
Yeah.
just, like I said, I would assume, like, because everybody's looking for the Jalen Suggs type of extension, right? 5 years, 150. It's just like Dyson Daniels. I don't think he gets that, right? He probably gets somewhere in the lines of like, kind of like what Bobby Mark said about Dyson Daniels, right? Maybe like 5 years, 120, 115, 125 or something like that. I don't think he gets the full max because that would be a lot of money. for a guy who's good, right, but probably isn't like Jalen Suggs
Right.
quite level good. So so I would assume that based off of just what you need, I would think this is another one that will probably get done. But like I said, probably not the full max,
Yeah.
just because it's
Yeah.
too valuable of a player.
Yeah, I think a lot of these will probably end up getting done because, to my knowledge, these can pretty much be signed at any point in the season, right?
Uh, I think I think they need to do it like pretty soon,
Oh,
if I'm
really?
not mistaken. I don't think they do that. Yeah, the deadline extension is 6 p.m.
Oh,
Um,
snap!
yeah, so actually it's 6 p.m. after this episode.
All right,
You know,
well, never
so
mind.
yeah, so by the time you see this episode, these guys,
Yeah,
may or may not get signed.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay. Well, if that's the
rookie
case,
extension.
yeah, if
Yeah,
that's the case, then yeah, I am curious, what the end result is going to be. But yeah, I agree with you. I think most of these will get done then.
yeah. I believe rookie extensions are different from non-rookie extensions, where with the non-rookies like the vets, you have until later in the season to extend. But with the rookies, you have to do it before the beginning of the season, like before opening night.
Yeah,
There's also Peyton Watson. I don't know what happens with him. If he did get an extension, it'd be way less. I mean, just because he's not in that tier of player either. But I do think that I think Browns will get done. I don't know about Watson's.
yeah,
Then for Detroit, you have a pair of guys, Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duran, and those are other ones where my guess is I actually don't think that those ones will get done. I actually don't think that either of those guys will get extended, even though I like both of the players and think that they have upside. I don't see Detroit actually doing that. And in the case of Ivy, I think the other part that's tough is it seems like he's picking up some injuries now, right? Because you may not know, but Jaden Ivey is supposed to be out at least for a little while, I think a month or so, because he had another injury that unfortunately happened. Um, and they may want to possibly protect themselves in terms of that. And then with Duran, like I said, I actually have liked how he's improved, but I do think that there are questions about long term. Do you actually want him as your franchise center? Because if you do, then that means you're gonna have to pay him. And there are things that he does have to improve at because he's not like an elite rim protecting big. Offensively, he's got really good. He's got good touch. He's it really improved as a passer, playmaker. But it still does feel like there's still elements where it's like, yeah, I could see Detroit not being super confident long term, especially if we're looking at ahead for the Pistons team, right? Where we've talked about it, where they have a lot of guys that are kind of in their core where they're not strong outside shooters, where they need space to work and operate in. So that may not necessarily be the best, most ideal fit, with all these guys. But, like I said, I like them as individual players. I wouldn't be confident that those get done. This is one that I think would be the first one of these that we're talking about where I'm like, yeah, I don't think this one gets done.
yeah. I think there's a lot of question marks, which you already hinted at. Yeah, like you said, great upside, great potential of what they could be. Considering where they were taken in the draft, right? Like that's the whole logic behind it. But you do kind of have to look at the productivity and what we've seen recently, and yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. Then moving on, Tari Eason, right? So
Big
we
one.
already mentioned the Durant extension. Obviously, Jabari Smith Jr. already got extended earlier this summer. But Tari Eason still hasn't been done, right? And this is another guy where he's got upside and he's got a lot of ability on both ends of the floor, right? As a guy who can run the floor, be a good athlete. As also a guy who defensively, we've talked about it. He's the second piece of the Terra Twins group, right? With him and Amen Thompson. Just not quite as good, obviously, as Amen Thompson. This one, I don't know. I mean, I think that you could get this one done because I don't feel like he's a guy that's going to get anywhere. I don't feel like he's going to get the same level of money as the other guys just because even though he's good, he's probably going to be a six man, more of an energy guy. He has been an injury risk because he did play every game his rookie season, but he hasn't played much the last couple of seasons. So I think this one could get done. It just is a matter of, I guess, would he be okay with probably something around like, I don't know, 20 million or something like that? Because I don't think he gets much more than that. But also, like, if you're Houston, do you actually want to pay a guy like that much money? And he's a guy that's probably, like a six-man, maybe occasional starter if guys are out. But I think this one is one that could get done. Like I would feel more confident about this one than the Detroit ones. But it could go either way.
Yeah, I think this one is kind of interesting because I feel like you kind of I feel I don't want to say they need him, but they should
Mhm.
definitely do everything in their power to keep him. So I am curious what the end result is going to be,
Yeah.
but I guess the Durant extension does kind of I don't want to say like hinder some things, but it does beg the question of okay, how much are we going to give this guy?
Right. Yeah. Like that's why I'm saying like this one I feel probably less confident about, but I would still lean towards it gets done.
Right, right,
Just because, like you said, just because he is a valuable part of this team.
right,
And you don't have to pay him 30 million a year like you do some of the other guys.
exactly.
Yeah. Uh Benedict Mathurin for the Indiana Pacers.
Mm,
This is another one where, like, obviously due to Tyrese Halliburton's injury, right? This is a guy that's probably gonna have an increased role, especially on the offensive end. This one I actually don't think that they're probably going to do it. I mean, just because of what it seems like has happened over the last few months, right? Where we know that Halliburton was out and then they didn't pay Miles Turner, or I guess maybe they were surprised at how much Milwaukee gave him, but, they let him go. Uh, they don't really like being in the luxury tax. And then obviously, unfortunately, there's going to be, a gap year where they're just not going to be able to actually compete for the championship this year like they were able to last year and like they would have been had Halliburton not gotten hurt. So this one is probably one where if he were to get extended, it'd be probably a smallish amount. Like, I mean, even in the article, Bobby Marks kind of is like 4 years, 68 million is what he would offer if he was going to do it. But I don't know if he'll actually take it. Right. And at the same time, like in terms of the Pacers, like they're just not a team that usually is committed to putting a lot of money into their rosters. Like I said, I think they might have done it had they, the injuries not happened. But this one I feel like probably isn't going to get done. And I think at least for him, like, it would be nice if he could expand other parts of his game because he's going to have a higher offensive workload. But could he also improve maybe as a defensive guy? Could he improve as a passer, playmaker, as a little things type of guy? Maybe that might, help when they get to restricted free agency. But yeah, this is another one where I feel like it's probably not quite as likely.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. I mean, there are some question marks, right? And I'm not saying like he flamed out or he was bad in the finals or anything like that. Like everybody kind of,
Right, he
knows
had a couple of good games.
exactly. Everybody knows that there's positives and negatives with him, but it's tough. The money, I think the money, I'm not going to say the money is tight, but teams are definitely not just handing there's no more handouts in the league because of this whole CBA thing. So, that's the best way I would kind of describe that situation.
Right. Yeah. And like, I think there's real questions like in terms of like you're already paying obviously Halliburton, paying Siakam, paying them hard, and then that's already three guys that, are kind of like, some of your main ball handlers and Mathurin, that means you'd be paying a fourth guy. They also have TJ McConnell as well. So that's a lot of guys, right? Where like at a certain point, you're probably not going to pay everybody. And we talked about this 2 summers ago when we went when the Pacers in the offseason after they got to the conference finals, right, re-signed a bunch of their guys and ran it back.
Right.
Right. Where we're like, yeah, like for now, like you do have a lot of guys under really good contracts, but at some point they're not all gonna stay. And we already have one of them gone, and it was the guy who wasn't even in those extension talks in the summer, Miles Turner. So, now they have the other guys, but there's no guarantee that those guys stay.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And then I guess to round it out, I guess, you could all we already know with Walker Kessler, like that's going to restricted free agency. So we don't have to say a whole lot about that. Um Mark Williams for the Phoenix Suns, right? Is I don't know what to make of that one. I guess just to make it quick, I don't think he gets an extension.
I
He's
agree.
not played a lot of he's not played a lot of games. He's a risk injury wise, right? We know what happened last season where he was traded, and then the Lakers did the physical, and then they said no, we're not going to trade for you. And then he got traded to Phoenix from Charlotte for basically nothing. So that to me would kind of already be a red flag. Now maybe I could see, you go into this season and if he plays well in the summer, maybe he could get, a deal in restricted free agency, but I definitely wouldn't think he's getting an extension just because he hasn't played enough games, to show that you can really feel good about doing that, and then it's like, you got and eventually, like, come on, Malawach, right? That at some point will probably be their franchise center. Not right now, because he's a rookie, he's a project, but how many games is Mark Williams going to play this season? I don't know.
Right.
So that's kind of the question there. So this was one, like I said, just I don't think it gets done.
Yeah,
For
I
that.
would agree with you. I mean, like, and that's fine. Just given the type of track record and career that he's had so far, right? Like you said, like hasn't really played a whole lot of games, and I think he's more of a temporary solution to a plethora of problems, that Phoenix has right now. So, not too mad at that one.
Yeah, exactly. So let us know your thoughts in the comments about all these extensions, and whether or not you agree or disagree. But now we're moving on, and like I said, the NBA season's upon us, and we do have some games coming up, right? For opening night. Of course, we're gonna have the Houston Rocket, or excuse me, the defending champion Oklahoma City Thunder playing against the Houston Rockets, new look Rockets, and then we're gonna have the Luca Lakers, right, without LeBron because he's got the sciatica, playing against Golden State, right? Who with Jimmy Butler, right? They ran it back. They added some new guys like Horford, and Melton, but what are you looking to see, right? Opening night from these two matchups, right? Because like I said, you got the defending champs where the last few years, right, we haven't had a scenario where on ring night the team that won the title gets kind of flustered and then loses, right? Like we're in a streak now because the Celtics blew the doors off the Knicks opening night last season, right? And then the year before that, right, the Nuggets played the Lakers on opening night, right? Took care of them. And then before that, right, the Warriors, same thing to the Lakers, right? The Warriors won the title. They beat the Lakers on opening night. I don't even remember how the Milwaukee Bucks opening night was. I think they played Brooklyn, and I think they won, if I'm not mistaken, right? I'd have to go back and make sure. But we're on a streak now where it just seems like that opening night thing hasn't mattered as much. But just as a whole, interesting. And then for the Rockets, before we got on, right, Ime Udoka put out the starting lineup, which I'm assuming is going to be the starting lineup moving forward, where they got Thompson at point guard, right? So you got Thompson, you got Jabari Smith Jr., you got Durant, and then you got Şengün. So the fifth starter is Steven Adams. So that's going to be the guy that they're going to, I guess, roll with, right, lean into the double big lineup. And so I guess that will allow Capella to play backup center, right? So that way now you can use all three bigs at the same time. I believe I think I hadn't heard much, but it seems like Dorian Finney-Smith, I guess he's not going to begin the season, so he'll probably be out. Obviously, we know Van Vliet's out, and then Shepherd will be the backup. So didn't really expect it, but if you've watched them in the preseason, right, you have seen that they did experiment with different starting combos because they had some games with Reed Shepherd starting, and then they had games where it was like Capella or one of the other bigs starting. So yeah, like I mean, they're leaning into the identity of the double bigs, and I'm curious to see what it looks like against Oklahoma City, who also does the double big thing, right? Like they're gonna have Holmgren and Hartenstein playing
Yeah.
together in the starting group. So, what are you looking to see from opening night between these two teams?
A lot. I'm expecting a lot. Like I'm expecting Oklahoma City to probably come out firing, right? They have a lot, riding on I don't want to say like necessarily opening night, but on the season for sure because it's like yes, they won the championship, but they're on defense now whereas, last year they were more so on the attack. So I'm hoping that the Houston Rockets end up, pulling off a upset, I guess if that's what you want to call it. I'm expecting Houston's offense to look good. I'm gonna expect them to look calm, composed defensively. I expect them to get after the ball. But who knows? I think it's really gonna be, just It's going to be another NBA game where, adjustments are going to need to be made, and who makes them first, who makes them better, who adapts, who hits more shots, right? It's just going to be another opening night, but for sure, I think it's a special matchup in my opinion, because there are some narratives, right? KD coming back to Oklahoma City, like I said, the championship defense and stuff like that. So I am kind of curious, what the end result is going to be, but I'm taking Houston in this one, man. I have to. I think they're gonna. This is going to be a statement game for them, I think, and the combination of players that they can put out there, I think it rivals Oklahoma City's in a way.
Yeah, I like the fact that you kind of pointed out like a statement game because both teams are seeing themselves right as championship contenders, right? Yeah, obviously, Oklahoma City won the championship, so they're looking at, like you said, going from the hunter to the hunted, right? Like that's kind of a big thing where we've seen, the defending champions usually have a target on their backs where everybody comes out to play hard against them to try to kind of measure themselves in terms of like where do we stack up, right, compared to the defending champions, right? Because Oklahoma City is going to go into the season as the favorite, right? I don't know if everybody's going to just universally pick them to win it all, but they're definitely going to be the favorites just because they were the best team in the league last year. They're a young team with a bunch of upside. But if you're Houston, like you said, you'd like to make a statement because last season, right, they matched up against them relatively well, right? Like they have size, they have athletes, they have physicality, and you do kind of want to see what this looks like in terms of Durant out there, within this massive lineup where basically Durant's your shooting guard, right? So I mean, you don't have a lot of perimeter shooting, but you do kind of wonder, like, could they just potentially overwhelm? Durant has a lot of length, so I mean, could he still just easily get his shots off? Who's going to be running a lot of the offense? Like, we know that Houston is going to put the ball more so in the hands of Thompson and Şengün and let those guys kind of handle a lot of the ball handling and playmaking responsibilities. It is going to be your turn, my turn. And I am also curious to see like Reed Shepherd because again, that's a guy that didn't play much for the Rockets last year. So does he actually play and be a part of the rotation? As like the backup point guard? Do they go with a more veteran approach like an Aaron Holiday? So I am curious, but I understand him not being able to win out the starting spot just because in terms of the pecking order, right? Like you're not gonna be ahead of like Thompson or Şengün. But it is kind of interesting how they double down on the double bigs. Now Vegas, right? They got Oklahoma City as a 7.5 point favorite, which is pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
They're at home. They're gonna have the crowd um, behind them. So I think this is gonna be a really fun matchup, just because, like you said, you're gonna have a statement game between both of those teams. I'm probably gonna just go with opening night. Like we've been on a streak with the defending champs, and I think OKC will make the statement. So I'm gonna pick Oklahoma City.
There you go.
But I think if you're Houston, I think you'd like, like you said, to make a statement, pull off an upset, and get people talking about the Rockets, right? Because most people, as you mentioned in the last episode, have mostly moved off of Houston, right? With the Van Vliet injury, because now you don't have a real point guard. How are you going to be able to run your offense effectively in the half court against certain teams like an Oklahoma City? And you do kind of want to see how it works and what it looks like and see if they can maybe defy some of the odds here. Of course, it's one game on opening night, so it's not like a end of the world thing if you don't win it. Um, but but I would like to see it. So in terms of the injury report, like yeah, Dorian Finney-Smith game time decision, Clint Capella game time decision, Tari Eason game time decision. The only one that I feel like probably will probably not play is Dorian Finney-Smith. Obviously Fred VanVleet's just out. We know he's not coming back. And then for Oklahoma City, there's a few guys on the report as well. Topic is the only one that's I think him and Kenrich Williams are the only two that are for sure out, right? Because Topic had the surgery down below, and then Kenrich Williams, I think, had knee surgery, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So for the most part, both teams are going to have a decent crop of guys, but I do want to see what it looks like.
Yeah, I am curious about it, and yeah,
Yeah.
both teams are very very deep, and I'm expecting
Yeah.
some different combinations to come out.
Yeah, and then moving on for the second matchup, this is Warriors Lakers. Little bit different, right? Because obviously Warriors Lakers, like usually the meat of the matchup is kind of centered around LeBron and Steph, right? Who have played against each other forever. Obviously they're they're tight now, but like, they obviously have had history in terms of playing against each other in the playoffs, in the finals. But he won't be playing, right? LeBron will be out because of the sciatica. We're not going to see him for at least the first stretch of games this season. But, now everybody's talking about this is Luka's team, right? So most of the other crop of guys are supposed to be available for the team, right? That are going to be the actual rotational guys. And then for the Warriors, I believe Moody is out with a calf. Melton obviously is going to be out for a while because he's still recovering from his ACL. Kuminga and Butler are game time decisions or questionable, but I'm going to assume I think they'll play.
Mm-hmm.
That just, usually seems to be par for the course and for some of these type of matchups. And in terms of both teams, like I think both teams are going to want to make a statement. It's going to be in LA. But this is a matchup where this might be different from the first matchup where I don't know, because like if you look at the Vegas odds, like they have this as being pretty even. But this one I could see for the Lakers, it might be a little bit tough because you don't have LeBron. That's your most versatile player. He's a guy that by and large has played very well against the Warriors. You do have a crop of other guys that you can put out there that can, I guess, collectively maybe make up somewhat for his absence. Not really, but just at least on the offensive end, probably. But I do kind of want to see what this looks like because unlike the Warriors, the Lakers, we've not really seen much of their preseason groups like at all, right? They've really only had like one game where we got to see most of the guys on the team play alongside one another, right? And that was the last game of the preseason, right? Before that, it was kind of guys sort of in and out. Redick, right, in that last game, right, going into that game, he said this is probably going to be the starting five. And we talked about it when LeBron was first out, whether or not it would be like Derek Vanderbilt, Marcus Smart. Wasn't either of them. It was Gabe Vincent as the fifth starter,
Yep.
right? And then after the game, he said, yeah, that might just be a matchup for Golden State. So I don't really know what to expect in terms of who the fifth starter is. I mean, it was kind of, I guess, talking about like the matchup, I guess, because Vincent can be a guy who can chase guys around screens. I mean, and then on the offensive end, right? He's not like an offensive liability. He's a streaky offensive player, but he is a guy that teams do have to guard and respect. So when he's hot, like, it can, like he's been in the preseason, he can be another ball handler. Personally, but as you know, right, I kind of said that I think they should start Vanderbilt, but of course, there's concerns with him as well on the offensive end because he doesn't really give you much on the offensive end. So I don't know. What do you think of this matchup? Like, what are you looking to see, from these teams? Because especially with the Lakers, like, yeah, there's a lot of guys coming back from last year's team, but there's also some new guys that are going to be coming in without LeBron, and I'm curious to see what a lot of those guys look like and what does it even look like as a whole because we have not seen much of it, right? Like, there's some offensive stuff that we saw, where there's a lot of movement with a lot of these guys, but I don't know what to expect, from this group of guys going into this game.
Oh yeah, my eyes are really on the Lakers. I'm gonna be real. I'm expecting big things from Luka. I expect him to kind of pop off, have a crazy game. I'm curious what Aiton's end stat line is going to be. I think that's one to watch as well, right? Like, how does he fare against, Golden State and what they bring to the table defensively? That's another thing because I think, yes, as much, hype that we give Golden State offensively, defensively, they're going to be a very good team as well. So I think that's something to watch is how do the Lakers find ways to attack, a very good Golden State defense, and I think that's probably going to be the number one problem is, outside of Luka, who do you really have to break down defenses like that? I mean, you have AR, but I think LeBron is massively, significantly better at breaking down defenses alongside Luka than, AR is alongside Luka. So, Gabe Vincent, I guess, with him potentially going in the starting lineup, that makes you smaller on
Right.
a lot of fronts on offense and defense. So maybe that's a good thing in terms of, certain things since the Warriors don't have a crazy amount of size. They do obviously have Horford now. But I think it'll be an even matchup. It's really going to come down to like, all right, can the Lakers find a way to defend against Steph and Jimmy, obviously, but also break through defensively or offensively against, what the Warriors provide defensively. And it starts with Luka. So.
And it is interesting just because, like you said, Vegas has this as a pretty even matchup.
Mm-hmm.
I like I said, it's like basically Golden State in terms of the odds is like -2.5 in terms of in terms of the score or whatever, right? So that basically means that yeah, this is like a 50-50 matchup, which like I said is to me is a little bit surprising just because I think, without LeBron, I'm a little surprised that it's like considered an even matchup. I guess like I said, the Lakers are at home, but just like you said, for the Warriors, like they're gonna look like the more comfortable team that's been together because most of these guys have been together already. And, because, it's a mostly veteran team, like these guys are going to know how to come in, how to play. I'm curious
Yeah.
to see if Horford starts versus coming off the bench, right? Because they've tried different lineups. I mean, you'd think they'd signed him to be their starting center, but I am curious to see what that looks like. I'm going to assume he's going to start. But what do you think in terms of this matchup? Like, do you have a prediction at all? It's okay if you don't.
Um,
Just because, like I said, this one is like I said, I'm just surprised that I don't see this as being as close of a matchup, I guess, without LeBron, but maybe that's just me. Like, what am I missing here?
yeah, I would agree. I want to agree with you fully, but at the same time, it's Luca. I'm that's the thing that's kind of like making me
Okay.
feel like, all right, I'm not gonna lie, like it wouldn't surprise me if Luca pops off and wins this game in the clutch. Like that could happen. Um, but I think I'm probably gonna go with my gut. I think I'm gonna go with the Warriors. I think the additions that they made, what they bring to the table defensively, and Al Horford and what he can do. I think they're gonna come out the gates firing.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with them as well. Just because, but for the Lakers, like you need to win a lot of these games without LeBron because they don't have a tough schedule to begin the season. Like there are some, tough matchups, but they do have a winnable stretch of games, and that margin for error is a lot different without LeBron because you don't have him to just be able to fall back on. And then obviously, the lineups change significantly as well, right? Because oftentimes, like Austin and LeBron will have their lineup together, but now it's going to be Austin running his own offensive unit, with some of these guys, and how do they figure out which guys match up, well with one another? And I'm curious to see how that works, right? And like I said, I'm also curious to see whether or not Vincent stays as that fifth starter or do they kind of switch it up and go with somebody else? I mean, of course, it could matter how it closes, but you'd like to get off to a good start if you're, the Lakers, right? Because chances are, if the Warriors get off to a hot start, it might be a little bit tougher for the Lakers to get back into the game. Whereas, if the Lakers get off to a hot start, maybe they can stay hot. So, a lot, we'll see. Of course, it's opening night; anything can happen. But I am super excited about these two matchups.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, um, moving on, I guess just in terms of like going into the season, are there any potentially bold predictions that you might have? Because just in terms of how this season goes, like every year it seems like there's always something that happens that we don't expect. Like obviously last year was like the Luca trade. But do you have any others? Like just it
Mm,
could be literally anything.
yeah, that's a good question. Um, hmm. Um, I mean, there's like a lot of ways you could really go. Um, I mean, I don't know if this is bold, but like Timberwolves Western Conference Finals again. Is that crazy? Is that bold? Because I don't know if people like have them like going super far. I
Right.
think people have them being good, but I've seen a lot of people picking Denver, OKC, Houston. So it's like, well, if you're picking those teams, then Minnesota would kind of have to be, I guess, out of the playing field pretty early.
Minnesota, yeah, Minnesota is definitely, I think, kind of fallen in terms of what people are looking at. I think like we've basically felt like that they're now being underrated. I think in the like championship odds, they're not even in the top four. Right? They're down. I think maybe to like six or something like that, which is kind of interesting. That like they're like where they're ranked, I think is behind some teams where yeah, I don't really agree with that, but just as all yeah, let's see. Yeah, like we might as well look at the finals odds just because, like I said, we don't bet. But yeah, like I'm looking at the Minnesota Timberwolves, they're ranked on FanDuel, they're ranked like eighth.
Okay.
So you have Oklahoma City as the favorite, then they have Cleveland, then Denver, then the Knicks, then they have the Clippers 5, the Rockets 6, the Lakers 7, and then Minnesota 8, which I think like that's really low. I would put Minnesota above at least a couple of those teams, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. I guess that would be one of the predictions. Um Another one might be Eastern Conference turns out to be more fun to watch than the West. I don't know. I feel like that could be a bold one, just depending on all the new look teams and potentially the rookies. Like say we get a healthy Charlotte, they could be a fun team. Say Detroit, pops off, or even like Chicago. Like what if all these teams that were kind of just like really bad last year, all their young guys take a leap and it's really entertaining.
Yeah, and that's that, and the young player leap is kind of always like one of those bold predictions where like you take a guy that like not as many people expect. Like I remember for you it was like Dyson Daniels, right?
Yeah.
Like a couple of years ago, right? And then like now he's, most improved player, and then is in a really good spot. I guess Laurie Markkinen
Mm.
getting traded,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of where he could potentially go, like, if the Pistons don't extend those guys, you know, I could see them kind of like calling about marketing and maybe including some of those guys in a package.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, now that you have Cade as an established star now, right, who's gotten, some battle scars in the playoffs, that could be a guy where they're now more comfortable building around him. And I could see them doing something like that. I don't think they have to necessarily, but if this season goes better than some people think, because Detroit's another team that I think people are lower on now than they were going into or coming off of last year. I think people are lower on Detroit this year. Like they think that they'll probably be a little bit worse than they were last year.
Yeah.
So if they get off to a hot start and they're actually better than maybe what some people think, could they maybe be like, yeah, let's go all in on a guy like Market, and if we're not going to pay these other guys, and kind of try to figure it out. I'd be curious to see who's in the deal, but that's something I could definitely see.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, and like I said, it's a tough one because in some of these bold predictions, like sometimes you got to get crazy, with some of them. I don't know if you have any other ones, but yeah, that was just kind of one that I thought of,
Yeah, that's a
just
good one.
because, yeah, just because with the marketing one, it's kind of hard to ignore it because we talked about it, and unfortunately he's been hurt since then, right? But the way that Ace Bailey kind of made his debut in the preseason, and I'm not expecting him to average 20 a game as a rookie, but just with the way he looked, where he looked really polished offensively, I could see Utah kind of talking themselves into like, well, shoot, now that we got this guy, maybe we might be okay with moving him from marketing. But the problem is now is I don't know if you're actually going to get a great return
Yeah,
for him
what's
because
the
I feel like
market?
yeah, because I feel like the market for marketing, no pun intended or anything, I feel like might be a little bit lower than it probably was because now he's making a lot more money. He's had a kind of back to back downish years, and so there might be more incentive, for it seems like Utah has kind of been in this theme the last couple of seasons where they waited to move a bunch of guys, and then by the time they moved them, they were valued at almost nothing,
Yep.
right? Like to the point where, like, say, Colin Sexton, you had to give up things in order to trade him. You didn't even like you got back Yusuf Nurkic, where okay, it's a decent option, I guess, if you want to call it a decent option as a backup center. But if you ask me what could you get for Colin Sexton like 2 years ago, I wouldn't have thought Yusuf Nurkic. I mean, but that's how it went. Like, and they couldn't get anything back for Clarkson or John Collins. Like Clarkson, they had to buy out, and then Collins, it was just basically veteran contracts, right? Love
Yeah.
and Kyle Anderson.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So, moving on, I guess now, to close things out, we do have, in terms of like some news and things around the league. I guess I failed to mention in terms of like additional extensions, like you did get AJ Green for the Milwaukee Bucks, 4 years, 45 million. Obviously with the Bucks, like some of that ties into a solid player, right? That fits with what they want to do. But you do kind of question, like, all right, this Bucks team, what is it gonna look like? How good are they gonna be? What's going to happen with Giannis, right? Like I said, I don't think we're anticipating he gets dealt this summer or that he asks out. Not this summer. I don't anticipate that he gets dealt by the deadline. But I do think if things kind of go south, right, he can start looking somewhere else. And then by the summer, do whatever he needs to do. Because I mean, the way that this has gotten reported, like, I have a hard time feeling like he's going to stay, especially just on the especially just considering, what's the upside for Milwaukee. I mean, there are people who are higher on them going into the season, but I just think as a playoff team, I don't think they're going to be able to really get that far. And then, I don't think they can do as much to really improve it. And then at that point, what can you really do?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, do you have any thoughts about AJ Green, like the player, in terms of the
I mean,
extension, or is it?
he's okay. It's just like I'm anything the Bucks do that doesn't necessarily involve bringing in high end talent or securing Giannis, and making sure that he doesn't leave. I'm not going to say I don't care, but I think it's borderline useless, right? Because at the end of the day, like in the long run, your goal should be retaining Giannis and winning championships with that guy, right? And they haven't really built teams that put them, in the driver's seat of that goal. So I'm not sure really what the thought process here is. I mean, I get it. You kind of have to retain other players as well, which is fine. I don't really have a problem with him, getting this extension. But
Yeah,
outside of just not bringing in competent talent to help Giannis, it kind of just is annoying.
yeah, like he's a good player that gets that deserves the extension. It's just like you said,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's just you're just kind of thinking like you're just retaining the asset.
Right.
Yeah. Then the Mavs extended Jason Kidd, a multi-year contract to remain with the team. Obviously now the Mavs, are looking at big things, right? You got Cooper Flag coming into the building, with Anthony Davis. Eventually, hopefully Kyrie Irving will be back, whether or not it's this season or next season. So this makes sense, right? Like, I mean, he did help them get to the finals, and then obviously they had the Luka trade since then, but no real issues with this one.
Yeah, that's fine. I think he's it's a well deserved extension, and even if you did want to move on from him, who are the options out there? And I think he hasn't really given. I don't think the Mavs any reason to fire him. So
hmm Yeah, and then I guess last but not least, Mike Dunleavy, was doing a Friday appearance on, I guess like a Warriors radio program
hmm
where he was kind of basically saying that like Steve Kerr is like entering the final year of his deal, and nobody really said anything in terms of like there's a guarantee that he comes back. I mean, so I don't know. You would think that like presumably like Kerr's been there pretty much from the beginning, right? So you would think that he would probably go out with those guys, but you don't really know. Obviously, in terms of this team, right? You basically have a 2-year window, right? All their, Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond, they're signed through 2027. And then obviously that's going to give them the optionality to see what happens in terms of maybe they can go after Giannis, maybe they could go after Jokic, who knows? But what do you think? Because I mean, just in terms of he's been championship coach, I know we've kind of talked about like there's been at times I guess online right discussions in terms of frustrations with him, but like he's a good coach. Like obviously he's a winning coach. Like he knows what he's doing out there. Obviously, like the job hasn't been easy the last couple of years just because the roster hasn't been quite as good and there's been a lot of turnover. But I don't know. Like I mean, I guess I would normally say I'd be surprised if he didn't go out with those guys, but now that I guess it seems like Lacob has more control and more say over what they're actually going to do. I mean, I guess he was, the team governor before, but now I guess he's putting in his own guys. So I couldn't really tell you, but
yeah. I mean, I don't think he should be gone. Granted, there have been some questionable moments, questionable lineups, questionable, adjustments, lack of adjustments, at times, especially in the postseason. Um, but I mean, look at the guy's resume, right? like you said, he's a
yeah,
winning coach. He's got tons of experience as a player and also as a coach. So I think those things are very invaluable at this point. So I would expect him to kind of bow out whenever Steph and Dre bow out as well. So
yeah, exactly. And then also earlier today, I guess to close it out, we did get from the Wall Street Journal, right? I guess we're getting more stuff about aspiration, right? But the Wall Street Journal actually put out or that I guess the co-founder, right, was claiming that the Clippers approached him for the endorsement with Kawhi, right? Which would go against what Steve Ballmer said. I mean, of course, we'll have to see. The NBA, of course, is doing its own investigation. We'll probably not know anything about the final outcome for quite some time. But it is just kind of funny how, like I said, we're just continuing to get more stuff about this situation.
Yeah, it's gonna keep on coming. Pretty much. So, that doesn't really surprise me, but it is wild. The contradictions are starting to rear their ugly heads.
Yeah. Then to close it off, we're gonna just do what we normally do in terms of our polls that we put out. So our last one that we had was who's your pick to win the championship, and I had in terms of the options, right? I had OKC, I had Nuggets, because I had our picks.
Mm-hmm.
Then I also put in Oklahoma City since the defending champs, and then I put someone else. And so we actually had a two. This one was somewhat surprising to me. So we had a two-way tie for first between OKC and the Rockets
Okay.
at 33% each. Then we had 27% say someone else. Then we had 7% say Denver.
Oh
So
wow.
that's somewhat different than I probably would have expected, just given. And it looks like we just got from Shams that Christian Brown got the 5-year, 125 million extension.
There it is.
So
Yeah. Not mad at the extension for sure, but yeah, those poll results are kind of interesting.
yeah,
I wouldn't have thought that it would have been a two-way tie between OKC and the Rockets. I would have probably thought the Rockets would have been the lesser of all three options, honestly. Like, it
right.
wouldn't have surprised me if, people went with someone else over the Rockets. The Denver one being last borderline is kind of weird. I would have thought more people would have picked Denver and Oklahoma City.
I know. Yeah, and like I said, maybe in the future, what I might do is, I might put them up on the other socials because it could
Sure.
just be the way that people are on IG, because this is
Sure.
from Instagram,
Right.
might be different than if we put it out like on X or some of the other ones. So I'll probably start doing that as well. It is kind of a good check, just kind of see where people are at in terms of who they think might win the championship.
Absolutely.
'Cause so, but yeah, so that pretty much concludes today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on everything that we talked about in terms of extensions, in terms of opening night, what you want to see. NBA season, it's basically here. By the time you see this episode, season probably might have already started, and then by the next time we record, we'll have a lot of actual basketball to talk about, which is always to me the most fun part of the season. I mean, obviously everybody always is excited about the off season and everything else that comes with that, but the actual sport, getting to watch it itself,
Yeah.
to me is the most fun part, the most exciting part. So hopefully you all enjoy it with us as well. We appreciate all the support. Of course, again, if you want to respond to these polls at the OBT podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.